Football at 4, Tuesday with Andrew DiCecco here on 97.3 ESPN. He, like all guests, appears via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. And let's get into some NFL, some Eagles stuff here. Andrew, what's going on, man?
I'm doing well, Mike. How about yourself?
All is well. I tell you what, as the weather's starting to get nice and hot out there, it is nice and hot down the shore today. Starting to think about mini camps, training camps. But we were just talking about the, some stuff that surfaced of Carson Wentz being out and about, Jalen Reagor, and getting out in the field down in Houston. And I guess that's the first real feel. Do you value those guys being able to take these opportunities and getting out there and doing some stuff, even without the coaches around?
Yeah, I think that's tremendously beneficial, especially, having those idle months where you're not really getting that grass time, as Doug Peterson said. Carson Wentz has done this in the past. In 2017, before the Super Bowl season, I believe he had all the wideouts go to North Dakota, Fargo, North Dakota, and kind of build that rapport there. And you kind of got to see what that off-season work looked like when you saw it seamlessly transition into the regular season. So I think it's great to have Jalen Reagor there. I think he's probably the one player that can benefit the most out of these extra throwing sessions with your quarterback. And I think Greg Ward lives in Houston. He went to the University of Houston. I think he lives out there. So wouldn't surprise me if he also joined them. I know he's been part of that group that's worked with Carson in the past. So yeah, no, it's definitely encouraging to see.
Yeah, Rieger's one of them that we know for sure. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside is also out there, as is Marquise Goodwin. So a couple of guys that we definitely know. I don't know who else is out there, but those were three of the names that I had to come across that were out there. And, Rieger's obviously the big one. It's getting a chance to kind of get – and I guess what it is, Andrew, is getting that timing, getting the sense of what these guys do, getting to know when they make their breaks, and getting a start on it now as opposed to the first time. Remember, there is no mini camps and everything, as opposed to the first time you meet the guy in person, say in late July. So getting the timing and all that thing down is something that I really like to hear, that him and Reagor especially. And then Goodwin, when you talk about throwing the deep ball, kind of getting the timing down with that, that's something that Wentz has really had problems with because he hasn't had the same arsenal of guys.
Yeah, Mike, it's imperative that he gets this time in now because, without the OTAs and the mini camps and everything, every practice is magnified. Every rep is valuable in training camp now because you only have so many before you start the preseason play, and that goes right into the regular season. So they really need to hit the ground running, and I think this is a great step towards that.
Yeah, and another thing too, Marquise Goodwin, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, those are two guys most likely that will be battling. That's something interesting. We were talking about receivers a couple of weeks ago. Do you see them staggered into, hey, it's going to be Greg Ward in the slot, and he's going to be battling with John Hightower and Quez Watkins for that, or are they going to look for guys who can play? Because one of the problems Whiteside had last year was he was struggling with learning the terminology. So do you think they make these guys learn one spot and put them in a competition, or try to get them to be versatile and learn multiple spots?
Well, there's a new receiver coach, Aaron Moorhead, so it's yet to be determined how he's going to approach that. You saw Carson Walsh and his approach to J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, and when J.J. came out and said, I would go into game days and not really know what I was doing, where I was lining up, what my responsibilities were. So I think that to answer your question, I think they would be better served right now to kind of get a John Hyde or get a Quez Watkins, get them acclimated in one spot before putting too much onto their plate because they're going to be behind the eight ball as it is. So, and I think as far as when you're looking at what receivers you're going to keep, you really need to you don't really want to focus on, specific body types and roles. You want to just keep the best group of pass catchers that you have, whether that be 5 or 6 guys.
How much of an impact do you think the wide receivers coach can have? If you look at last year with Carson Walsh, is it his fault that they weren't able to be better than what they were? How much of an impact do you really see a wide receivers coach having on some of these players?
Well, in Carson Walsh's case, he had never run a receiver room before, and outside of Greg Ward, there wasn't a receiver on the roster that kind of took a step forward, which is kind of an alarming characteristic coming from a receivers coach when you don't really have anybody that kind of elevates their performance besides a squad player who has been in the system since 2017. And you look at Aaron Moorhead; he's played in the NFL. He goes about 6'4". He has a commanding presence, from what I understand. I think a lot of players may more, he's more relatable to a lot of players, having that prior NFL experience and just, being able to commanding a room. He was a receivers coach at Vanderbilt. And I think that, he has a lot of different, and he has past experiences to kind of lean on and share that with the receiving core. And I think that you're going to see a vastly improved group of receivers this year.
Andrew DiCecco, Football 4, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. And, we talk about that Wentz is out there in Houston. They're finally getting some time together and throwing the ball around. But there were some reports yesterday, Andrew, that the NFL could look to push training camp up. It doesn't look like there's going to be mini camps, but because of that, we could be seeing training camps start a little earlier, and that's a positive sign as well.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a positive sign. A lot's going to depend on every team in state has to be on the same page. So a lot's going to depend on I think California would probably be the biggest hurdle there, but it's definitely encouraging to see because, like you said, the time is so minimal right now that and the season's going to be here before you know it. So they really need to maximize their practice time, and I definitely think that it's trending in the right direction there.
All right, offensive line stuff. I saw Gil Brandt tweet the other day. You responded. He said he was thinking about the best offensive lines in the NFL. 6 he came up with and did not include the Eagles. Now, it feels like the Eagles are always included when talking about some of the best offensive lines, but is simply losing Jason Peters pulling them off of this list?
It's hard to say. There's teams on there that I kind of scratched my head at to begin with, and when you look at the contingent of the offensive line that the Eagles have, and Brandon Brooks is the best guard in the NFL. Quentin Nelson from the Colts might be the only guy that kind of compares to him. Jason Kelsey's a top 3 center. You got Lane Johnson, who's the best at his position. You got Isaac Seumalo, who after he rebounded nicely from that poor showing against the Falcons in Week 2, and he's one of the more underrated offensive linemen in football. So Andre Dillard, they invested draft capital in him, significant draft capital in him, and this is a pivotal offseason for him. But when you have such a strong unit, I think it was kind of puzzling to see them left off the list. I didn't quite understand that, but obviously they don't have the depth of some of those teams that were on the list. We got into the Matt Pryors and the Jordan Mailatas and the Jack Driscolls and the players of that mold, and they do have potential, but it's unproven potential at this point.
A hot topic right now around the league is Dalvin Cook extension talks, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but I just wonder if Sanders continues to take the steps in the right direction. What are the Eagles going to do when it comes to Sanders and his contract extension talks? With this position, it's just so crazy to think about how productive they are and how important they are. But when times come where it's time to get paid, teams just won't give out the money.
Yeah, and it's hard to say, Hunter, because the Eagles haven't really had a running back of Miles Sanders' caliber in quite a while. So, and we're, like you said, we are a ways away from that. A lot has to kind of play itself out over that time. But if he continues his trajectory, which there's no reason to believe it won't, we've kind of outlined how we think that he can very easily have 1,700 all-purpose yards this season. They're going to have a decision to make. They haven't really. It's hard to say that they're definitely not going to spend that kind of money to a running back, because when you look and see what Miles Sanders can do for an offense, similar to what LaShawn McCoy can do to an offense, it's kind of you want to invest in that player, and he's a homegrown talent, so. It's hard to say how it's going to play out over the next few seasons, but I have to think that they want to keep him in the fold for a while.
What is your take on? We've talked a lot about running back, because of some of the interesting names they have, but how do you see the end of the running back by committee here? Do we finally see that Doug Peterson's ready to hand things over to this Miles Sanders, or because of what we're talking about, do teams want to try to get away from having that guy because they don't want to pay that guy?
Yeah, and Jeff wrote an article on that just a little bit ago, but I think it is the end of the running back by committee. Doug said that he was all for the running back by committee, but if you really look and read between the lines, that's all he's really had to go off of. He hasn't really had that blue chip talent, so to speak. And now that he does, you're going to see he had a 3-down workhorse in Miles Sanders. So I think that now you're going to see less of an emphasis on, kind of finding ways to manufacture touches for your second and third runners and just kind of move forward with Miles Sanders, who's probably going to get anywhere from 16 to 18 touches a game.
Do you think that the running back by committee could actually be better than having that 3-down back? I mean, you get to keep guys less rested, less time to get injured. I mean, it just seems like the running back by committee has been so solid that is it a recipe for success? I'm not saying to because the Eagles have what they have in Miles Sanders, I'm not saying to not utilize him a lot, but I'm just looking at what the Eagles have done over the last few years with some of the committees, and it has shown success. So is that a bad philosophy to have? We talk about it as if maybe they should try and get away from that. And is that the case? Should all teams look to get away from a committee?
Well, there's pros and cons to both, Hunter. Obviously, with the committee approach, you can keep guys fresh and keep that, and it kind of minimizes the wear and tear on the body. And that particularly works if you have, 3 runners with varying skill sets. If you have some with the similar skill sets, it's very redundant and it really doesn't serve that much of a purpose. But, when you have a guy like Miles Sanders, a 3-down guy who can just stay on the field and keep the offense in a rhythm. And I think that that's such a rare commodity in today's NFL. There's so few guys that can actually do that and kind of, have that, workhorse, true, 3-down running back label. It's so rare that I think that when you have one, you gotta find a way to keep them.
How do you
keep them in the mix?
How do you compare? I know you just did a piece on the Giants, and they got Barkley. Mm-hmm. You got Elliott in Dallas. How do you compare Sanders next to those two guys?
It's far too early to kind of determine where we're gonna slot Miles Sanders in comparison to those guys. But and he has a different body type and somewhat of a different skill set than some of those guys that you mentioned. But he has a very high ceiling. I could see him, having that type of Saquon Barkley production. Saquon is the only offensive weapon that the Giants have right now, so the offense kind of runs through him. So he's going to get a lot more touches than Miles Sanders will. Same goes for Ezekiel Elliott. Those guys are the focal points of the offense. So, but in Ezekiel Elliott, he's more of a downhill runner. He can catch the football. He's a little bit bigger. Same thing with Saquon Barkley, but Miles Sanders is a little bit more explosive, I would say. He's a little bit more explosive than some of those guys, and I think that he has yet to scratch the surface with how good he can be.
Andrew DiCecco, Football 4, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. Looking at some Eagles. We'll get into some NFL stuff as well. And, one of the things we talked with Jeff about on yesterday's, there was Fletcher Cox made the list of Pro Football Focus's top 50 players. Now, where he fell on that list, I was pretty surprised. He was 15th overall in the entire league, and he was the second best defensive tackle. So when I say Fletcher Cox's name to you, would that be where you would envision him being league-wide amongst his peers? The number 2 defensive tackle in all of football and the number 15 overall player.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You look at the impact that Fletcher Cox had on football games. You look at his production from 2018. He had 830 snaps. He accounted for 80% of the snaps. And he had 10.5 sacks. But then when you look at 2019, when he had 799 snaps and saw that production dipped from 10.5 sacks to 3.5 sacks, on the surface, you might be like, well, he had a dip in production. Maybe his play has fallen off. Well, that's not necessarily the case. When you watch the tape, you look at, there's a lot of things that are at play there. You look and see he had to play all those snaps. He didn't have Malik Jackson next to him. He has a rotating cast of characters. We look at, Akeem Spence, T.Y. McGill over the years, Bruce Hector. And you have so many of these different guys that he really has to play all the snaps. And he didn't get that extra help off the edge like he had the previous season with a Chris Long, with Michael Bennett, with Brandon Graham having a big year. So he has to play a lot of snaps. You kind of see him wear down towards the end of the season, but he commands double teams. He's explosive off the line, quick burst. He has good lateral movement. There's a lot of things that he does well that might not show up on the stat sheet, but it's impactful on game day.
Yeah, it's weird because I don't know. I guess he just doesn't he's not in when you talk about like Aaron Donald, his name comes out first. And I'm not like JJ Watt plays the end and he's a tackle, but I feel like nationally he doesn't get the same recognition as some of those other top level defensive linemen.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that he really doesn't get that kind of buzz. And you see Aaron Donald, he's got that chiseled physique, and he puts up all these these training videos where he kind of has defensive back type feet and quickness, and he's so explosive off the line, and you kind of they've had some primetime games where he's really showed out. So he's going to get, and he's a phenomenal player. He's arguably the best player in the NFL. So I mean, there's no question about it. So I mean, it's kind of weird when you look at the defensive tackle position as a whole, and you see Aaron Donald, and there's a cast of characters, but Fletcher Cox there's no question that he's the second best defensive tackle in football when you look at all that he brings to the team and what he means to the Eagles.
Yep, it's interesting. And then there was another guy on that list on that defensive line, which was Brandon Graham, and he was number 49, not quite the same, but still top 50 player. Are you at all concerned that we see that kind of slip from Brandon Graham at all this year? I mean, he is going to be, 32 years old, and sometimes those players just all of a sudden go from one spot and then boom, like a light switch.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that concern's always going to be there, especially when you get on the wrong side of 30. But Brandon's been a very consistent player over the last 6 or 7 seasons. He had 8.5 sacks last year, 17 quarterback hits, which a lot of people might, roll their eyes at. But in some cases, it's just as good as getting a sack. And his 17 quarterback hits were even more than when he had in 2017, when he had a career season with 9.5 sacks. So I think that he's another guy. He doesn't have that prototypical size for a defensive end. He's got these short arms, but he's got a relentless motor. He's a technician on the edge, and he uses his hands very well. And he's a student of the game. He studies his opponent very well, and it shows up on game day.
Going back to Fletcher Cox, next to him will be Hargrave and Malik Jackson. What should we expect out of Malik Jackson this year after the injury last year and what he did earlier in his career? You get to play next to a guy like Fletcher. When he does get his time out there, what should we expect from him?
I think you're going to see the Malik Jackson that you saw 3 seasons ago, because he's going to be a lot more. He's going to be a lot fresher, and he's recovered from the injury, and he's going to maybe even see some snaps off the edge. So it's going to kind of play to some of his strengths there. He's not going to have to be that 3-down tackle. He's going to have some help there. So I think that when you see he can alleviate some of the pressure for one off the defensive end rotation. When you see there's a drop off there when you have Derek Barnett and Brandon Graham. So I think we'll play some defensive end there, and also be a key to third defensive tackle, kind of like what Vinny Curry and Chris Long have done in the and as far as moving inside NASCAR packages.
All right, Football 4, Andrew DiCecco's with us. We're hopeful, by the way, that we see fans in the stands. We saw that New Jersey just opened up, and I guess there's a possibility for that. I'll ask you whether or not you have any anticipation, or do you think now at this point that when the season kicks off, we're going to see some semblance of 25%, 50%, 75% full stadium? Where do you feel? Where do you stand on that?
I do, and this is something I kind of battled with. I think there's going to certainly be some fans there, but as far as being at full capacity, I don't necessarily think that's going to be in play. I think you might see, I don't know, half full probably, because you still got to keep that distance, and but I think that there'll certainly be some fans in the stands, and it's really trending in a positive direction. We talked about how training camp is possibly going to be bumped up. So, I mean, things are starting to, play favorably into that. I just don't think it'll be completely full.
All right, before we roll, and I know there's been a lot going on. The NFL on Friday put out a statement that was, really making the rounds, a lot of impact from both sides here. Malcolm Jenkins responded today saying, quote, "I still don't think the NFL has gotten it right until they apologize specifically to Colin Kaepernick or assign him to a team. I don't think that they will end up on the right side of history." That's what Malcolm Jenkins just recently said today. Were you surprised, number one? I said to Jeff yesterday, Andrew, I had to look at the account multiple times and make sure I wasn't getting duped. Like, I really was like, is this a fake account? were you surprised, and do you think that was a significant message from the NFL?
It was, but only, like Jeff said, only if there's actions that follow that message. It can't just be you make this, you deliver this, this message, and then that's the end of it. He finally admits that the NFL was wrong for not listening earlier and encouraging, all to speak out. And you got to see that joint video from prominent NFL stars. It was so nicely done. And he did. He said he would be reaching out to players that, raise their voices and others in an effort to be more united. Now, that sounds great, but we need to see that happen before we can kind of, say that he's coming from, that he's being fully transparent. So, I mean, we're going to find out in the coming months whether there's some truth behind what he said and whether he's going to live those words. It was definitely encouraging to see.
Yeah, that's definitely something I really am anticipating seeing if that was a Friday news dump type of thing and just kind of put it out there and hope that people forget about it, or if they really make an effort to try to do something to change here. But it'll be interesting that Malcolm Jenkins stepping up today to say something, saying, look, I appreciate it, but until you say something specifically to Colin Kaepernick, because he kind of danced around it. Hey, we didn't listen to our players in the past, and I guess that was his kind of way of maybe giving a tip of the cap to Kaepernick. But I guess some players,
I took it too.
Right? It just seems that some players are like, nice try, but we caught you.
Yeah, hey, that's immediately what I thought of when I read that too. It's like, pretty much like, we got you here. If you're gonna admit that you were wrong, then you need to issue an apology to Colin Kaepernick and kind of right the wrong that you've kind of let open-ended for the past few seasons. So I agree with you there.
All right, A. DiCecco NFL on Twitter. Give him a follow. 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles training camp will hopefully have a date at some point in the near future here. And as news continues on the NFL, we got you here on Football at 4. All right, Andrew, take care, pal.
All right, guys, tough Friday.
And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Yes, he's back on Friday. Mosher's in tomorrow. We'll do a little Ask ITB stuff with Jeff Mosher, Adam Kaplan on Thursday, and Andrew's back on Friday. Football at 4 powered by InsideTheBirds.com.